Keir Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party has swiftly become a political car crash, one that his own MPs are struggling to avoid. What began as a murmur in the corridors of Westminster has erupted into full-scale rebellion. Starmer, who once championed the idea of making Brexit work, has now been exposed as nothing more than a Trojan horse attempting to drag the UK back into the EU's orbit. His secretive moves toward a pan-European Mediterranean convention have set off alarms within Labour ranks, and the response has been deafening. Far from being a quiet whisper, this rebellion is loud and brash, and the truth is clear. Starmer is betraying the very voters who handed him the keys to Labour's future. It's not just an isolated group of disillusioned MPs. Labour members, especially those from Leave constituencies, are standing up and shouting betrayal. MPs are now openly accusing Starmer of selling out Brexit voters, people who trusted him to respect the decision of the referendum and steer the country away from the EU's clutches. Instead, Starmer is using this pan-European convention to rekindle his love affair with Brussels, putting the sovereignty of Britain at risk. To call it a betrayal would be an understatement. It is a full-on political sleight of hand, where the promise of independence has been swiftly replaced with a quiet promise of realignment with the EU. The most damning part of this saga isn't just the betrayal of Brexit voters but the sheer audacity with which Starmer has tried to keep this hidden. He thought he could operate in the shadows, peddling EU-friendly policies under the guise of supporting Brexit. He assumed that his MPs, already walking on eggshells after years of internal turmoil, wouldn't notice the slow and steady erosion of the party's stance on the most critical issue of the past decade. But he miscalculated. The MPs who once had their doubts are now blowing the whistle on Starmer's secret agenda. His plans to align with the EU are no longer a hypothetical discussion. They are out in the open, and Labour is being torn apart as a result. It's one thing to move away from promises made in the heat of political campaigning. It's another entirely to drag the party and the country down the same slippery slope of EU entanglements that the majority voted to leave behind. These aren't isolated backroom conversations anymore. This is a direct challenge to the very foundation of the Brexit vote. Labour MPs who fought hard to keep their constituencies out of the EU are now staring down the barrel of a political disaster. Their seats are on the line because Starmer's covert EU plans risk alienating the very voters who believed him when he said Brexit means Brexit. This is where it gets truly reckless. Not only is Starmer facing the wrath of his MPs, but he's also taking the Labour Party down with him. With his clandestine meetings with the likes of Donald Tusk, one of the most vocal proponents of the UK's re-entry into the EU, Starmer's motives have become all too clear. If the whispers about these private discussions are true, Starmer's leadership isn't just in jeopardy, it's actively undermining the Labour Party's credibility. This isn't a political game, it's a betrayal that could destroy Labour's relationship with the very voters it needs to win back. For anyone who still thought Starmer was genuinely committed to making Brexit work, the reality is more damning. The secrecy, the backdoor dealings, the hidden intentions, all paint a picture of a leader who has fundamentally lost his way. If Starmer genuinely wanted to make Brexit work, he wouldn't be entertaining ways to realign with the EU behind closed doors. He wouldn't be pushing for policies that, at their core, risk subjecting the UK to the very rules that the country voted to escape. Starmer's actions suggest that his promises were always smoke and mirrors, designed to placate the public while he pursued a covert agenda of EU alignment. What's wise? Starmer seems to believe he can keep this entire debacle under wraps, that he can continue to play both sides of the political spectrum. On one hand, he parades around as a champion of Brexit voters. On the other, he's coordinating with the EU elite to bring the UK back into the fold. But MPs aren't buying it. They see through the facade. They know the reality of Starmer's duplicity. The whispers have turned into accusations, and the accusations are becoming an avalanche. At this point, the Labour Party is careening toward a political crisis of its own making. Starmer's leadership is under threat from within, and there's no hiding from it any longer. Labour MPs are desperate to distance themselves from his misguided EU flirtations, and their concerns are valid. If Starmer can't be trusted to keep Labour's promises on Brexit, what else is he willing to sacrifice for political expediency? What other fundamental pledges will he discard in the name of a political convenience that benefits only him and his Brussels allies? Make no mistake, this is just the beginning of Starmer's betrayal. If this pan-European convention is allowed to pass, it will be only the first of many EU-aligned policies that undermine the very concept of Brexit. If Starmer thinks he can sneak us back into the EU without anyone noticing, he's sorely mistaken. His MPs are already turning on him, and once the full extent of his plans is exposed, the consequences for Labour will be catastrophic. The party will implode under the weight of its leader's deceit, and Starmer will be remembered not as a leader of Labour but as the man who sold out the Brexit vote and broke the trust of the British people. If he's not careful, this will be the beginning of the end of his political career.